everybody. Welcome to the Janet Foster Show, the show where you get real talk for action. And, it's been a few minutes. We've been on a little hiatus, but I'm so glad to be back with you. And certainly what I am so thrilled about is to be a part of a new group and to be a part of a collective. And we are so happy to be a part of We Play Radio. And just like before, you're going to get the same guests that we've had before on, and we're going to get into the same conversations. And certainly, as always, I know that some of you have been keeping in touch with me during the hiatus, and definitely right now, you can get social with me right now on Facebook at Janet Foster, and on Twitter and Instagram at Janet D. Foster. And of course, that's D for Deborah, Janet D. Foster. And I will definitely be looking out for that. I've missed being able to be on the mic, and some of you have sent me messages, and I want to shout out to a former guest who has definitely been one of those individuals keeping in touch with me on Twitter, and that's Patrick Brutus. We had him on in September where he gave us an update on the situation going on in the Dominican Republic with the expulsion of Haitians. And every week I hear from Patrick. So big ups to you, Patrick. And thanks so much for you spreading the word about the show. And welcome to new listeners who may have heard about this show. And, with the change, we now come to you live during prime time here in Los Angeles. Yes, the #2 media market in the United States. This show, the little show that could, is now live on every Tuesday. And we'll be coming to you at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we'll get into the same talk. And just before, the hiatus, I talked about the opportunity for a fan to co-host. We are still in the search for that, and we're actually going to be lining up some co-hosts. So watch your Facebook page and definitely watch Instagram and Twitter, because when I reach out to you, I'm looking for you to ride shotgun with me on the air. And of course, if you are here in the Los Angeles area, that's great. We'll make that do, but you don't have to be in LA. And I'm, as always, I'm looking for diverse fans because we all have different viewpoints. And right now, what I'd like to do is kind of do a run through of some of the current events that have been going on. I mean, there have been some crazy things that are going on. And I don't have a guest this week because a lot of you have been tweeting me during the hiatus, kind of asking me things. And if you've been following the Facebook page, I have been posting trending news of the day. And of course, today I didn't do that because I knew I was going to be on the air and I wanted to talk to you about it. And obviously, the biggest things that are happening right now in the world is tied to the tragic events that happened over the weekend. And social media has been going crazy over all of the events. Just 2 weeks ago, a Russian airliner basically disintegrated over airspace over Egypt. And this week, just about 24 hours ago, the Russian government has concluded, and they did release that it has been determined that a bomb was placed on the airplane, and there's been talk of maybe an inside job. How was it possible for something like that to occur when people go through security? So that's one item, and one big news event. And then, of course, over the weekend there were several tragic events, and the world has been focused on one, but at the same time, I think that we all need to pay attention to what's happened. But definitely there's devastating bombing going on in Beirut over the weekend. And then there were mass murders in Kenya. And then the tragic, I think one of the most covered news stories of the weekend has obviously been the tragedy in France. And here in Southern California, just give a perspective for our listeners in other parts of the country. In Southern California, it was confirmed that a young college student, a student at California State University, Long Beach, she was among the victims in France that unfortunately lost her life while she was out enjoying her evening, where terrorists basically shot up restaurants. And then, of course, the tragedy in the music hall where a concert was going on, where a Southern California-based band was performing. The band did escape, but there were several people tragically harmed. And one thing to keep in mind with these terrorist events that have happened over the weekend has been, I think, social media response. And I think social media this is one of the times where social media is the most helpful thing, and at the same time, the most intrusive thing. And when I say intrusive, sometimes there can be a bit snarkiness about how people address tragedies. And when I say snarky, and I don't mean it in any disrespectful way of taking away from the seriousness of what's happened. Actually, there's been a lot of cynicism that has come out of how basically here in the United States, how U.S. media has covered these tragedies. And I find myself as someone who is a journalist, and I found myself being very selective about my news sources, where I was getting information about France, Kenya, and Beirut, particularly about what was going on in France. I have a tendency to watch foreign news broadcasts. I do speak some French, however broken it is. That is the first language that I learned in college. And my French, I have to say, I got reacquainted with it very quickly, just in my thirst for wanting to know what's going on, and because a lot of international news that I did watch, CNN International, I watch BBC, and I also watch. I tried to see if I could catch some of the Moroccan newscasts, which if you are familiar, in Morocco they do speak French, just to get different takes. And I must say, even with how not practiced my French has been over the years, I will say that I found the international broadcast, to be much more informative, much more fact-based, and a lot less speculative. And that's something in the coming weeks that we're going to talk about. I am looking at having a terrorism expert come and talk with us here and talk about that. But I'm also looking to pull in a panel of journalists with international experience as well as experience in the U.S., because I think a lot of things that we're seeing on social media in terms of the best word I can use is the snarkiness, some mean-spirited things that, and also some very overly aggressive things, and a lot of that thought pattern has been rooted in how the newscasts are delivered. Whether, people who watch certain cable news stations versus others, as well as even network news. And there's a difference, and we'll get into that difference. I know our audience is pretty smart, but we'll get into some of the technical details at kind of why maybe we get crappy information, and particularly these gaps show a lot of the times with international news. And a lot of times I do not pay attention to U.S. Newscasts for international events for that particular reason. And that's just me being a journalist, someone, if you think of it as someone who kind of knows better, it's kind of a trick of the trade. That's one of the things that I do want to explore, and we are going to talk about that in depth. And one of the things, though, about watching the international broadcast was there was quite an attention to detail and information. And while I was watching the French broadcast, I have another friend who actually lives in Germany, and they were watching it, and we were going back and forth on social media about what we were seeing and how we were seeing it. And that was something I noticed. And then I also had, my home looks like Grand Central Station sometimes. I also noticed a lot of the broadcasts in the U.S. And one of the things that was very, very concern to me was how we had these terrorism experts on speculating. There was only one or two experts that spoke on the various news programs, and only one was very definite at saying we must not speculate about what happened, whether they were homegrown terrorists, and this is in relation to the French, the incident in France, in Paris. Only one expert said you can't speculate whether it's either homegrown or whether they were someone who immigrated. And there was a lot of speculation about why the French government closed their borders, and then it became a frenzy at comparing it to the United States. And that's where a lot of troubling information has come out of. And through all of that detailed coverage of France, here in the U.S., a lot of Americans did not get information about what's going on in Beirut and Kenya. The majority of the information that was disseminated about what has happened in Beirut and Kenya has been on social media. And that's a little problematic. And of course, there's even speculation among Americans and other critics of American media. And when I say those other critics outside of the U.S., there's a skin color issue. We'll just keep it 100, but keeping it 100, keeping it real. And there's this issue about that. And I don't particularly agree with that, but it's something to explore. And those experts, I'm lining those up. But and I know a lot of you wanted to hear my take on the whole event. So now knowing the sources that I use for information, what I've been able to deem and kind of glean out of what I saw was I definitely saw a French government that was basically as aggressive as it could be. They joined in on the airstrikes. What most Americans may not know is that the United States has been actually running airstrikes on ISIS since the beginning of the year. But depending on either your news source or what you watch, you will not know it. You may think that there's nothing being done or that this just happened out of nowhere. And something for Americans to remember is nothing has happened yet. And sometimes, and this is where it seems to be a lot of controversy. And I've had a lot of discussions with friends who are former members of the military who have actually served tours of duty in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of my friends have also done, they were a part of Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and as well as Iraqi Freedom, and doing multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And their feedback, particularly for the ones who have formal education in bioterrorism, a lot of their feedback has been, when you're dealing with coordinated attacks, a lot of times it's people who have come in through normal channels. And right now, I know in the States, there's hysteria over the Syrian refugee crisis, some of unreasonable things like, let's accept the Christians but not the Muslims, when when I say that's unreasonable because it's discriminatory, you either take them all or none. And I know on this show I've talked about the Syrian refugee crisis, and my basic stance is, as long as the United States is not the only country in the world that's involved, then it's something that we should all embrace, particularly seeing how we've got this statue. It's called the Statue of Liberty in New York that says, "Bring me your tired and worn." And the refugees, the Syrian refugees, I don't think people realize these are people who are trying to get away from the extremists too. That's not something I think that's very easy to say. We're only going to let certain people in, and it's not tied to religion. And just like the argument that people say, well, extremists can pose as refugees. Well, extremists can pose as Christians too, if we were into that. And the president was quite firm in his speech and saying that we're not about that. And it's true. America isn't about that. I know we've got a history that we don't talk about, but in terms of discrimination, but it's something, it's definitely something that we can't openly do or say. And I know people are mostly saying this out of being fearful. Some things that I do believe that should happen is that we should allow the refugees in the country, the ones that we committed to. And generally when we do that, we're either looking for, we do extensive background checks on them. And, the one thing about terrorists, they wouldn't make it past those types of backgrounds. I think sometimes people have a lot of doubt about our government and their ability to do things. And it's when they're doing things, that's when they're preventing things. And I know this is personal to a lot of people because it's personal to me. I lost 2 friends on 9/11. And, when that happened, I couldn't understand it the day it happened. And then when we found out that there were warnings that the Bush administration didn't heed. And at the time, the security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, she had this type of information on, and she didn't do anything with it. That's the part where I think people seem to forget. And it seems like, the Bush administration slipped that one day, but it was one horrible day for us all. But since that horrible day, there hasn't been any type of terrorist attack from similar to or like that since that day. I mean, we talked about, if you remember, the shoe bomber. The shoe bomber was apprehended. And there have been so many times where we've been told via the media of thwarted attempts And I'm sure, we're going about our lives that people who are employed by our government, where it's their job to thwart these things every day, just think about the things that they are intercepting that we don't know about. And there comes a time where you just have to live your life. And I think watching the French this week, they've done their 3 days of mourning, and they've moved much quickly in terms of moving on with their lives. And they're mourning. They still feel bad, and but they're showing the terrorists that you didn't win. And I think that's the best way to deal with this. And where we show fear is with things about, well, we're going to limit refugees. When you do things like that, that's what the terrorists want you to do. And the best, I don't use very much colorful language, but the best way I can say it, the best FU to terrorists is for us to move about our plans and move about our days, just like business as usual, because it's not our lives that are being disrupted. These people have extreme views. They are afraid of modernization. They are afraid of civilized behavior. And we mustn't become uncivilized. And to be uncivilized is to say we are not going to accept people who are different from us and live up to the values of our country, which is that everyone has a chance in America. Everyone is welcome in America. And I just think that especially with these governors, particularly Republican governors, who are they're grandstanding right now and posturing to say that they're not going to accept any Syrian refugees when, hello, they don't have the authority to say so. It's all federal, and but it's basically a posturing move, and it's something that they need to do to save face, and it's also to gin up negativity among the public. Basically, it's not productive at all, but that's something that they want to do, and basically, it's un-American to do that. And on social media right now, there are a lot of messages and positive things that people are talking about Syrian immigrants. And I think, too, as Americans, we should listen to that community quite a bit more in terms of understanding. And what I find, what I've been finding quite interesting is immigrant groups themselves who have, whether they're one or just two generations in past immigration in the United States, they're even projecting negativity on Syrian refugees, which I don't really get that. And then there are some who are they can relate to that, because I have a lot of friends who are Cuban immigrants, whether they were children when their families came over with the freedom flights. A lot of them can identify it, and especially a friend of mine from Miami, she identifies the pictures of if you've been watching the Syrian crisis, you know, a lot of international media has been showing a lot of the desperation of a lot of families where they have been just taking to boats and crossing over into other water-based countries. And one of my friends said that reminded her of of the Mariel boat lift in Miami. And, you know, and she kind of pointed that out to me, and I kind of looked at some of those pictures and I really thought, and, you know, She came over, I think she was 5 or 6 on the Freedom flights, but then she had relatives that came into the U.S. through the Mariel boat lift. So there are some immigrant communities are very sympathetic, and they can identify with the Syrian refugees. And then I have another friend who, she was Nicaraguan, and I kind of asked her about it. And I said, how are you so adamant about this when, Nicaraguans were given refugee status in the United States in the 80s? And as a result of that, some children from Nicaragua were born here, and their parents were able to stay as a result of that. And if you're up on your history, you know that there were very tumultuous times in Nicaragua. But somehow, that friend of mine, she can't identify. She can't. She just doesn't identify with it. She's more tied to fear. To rationalize this or be able to see the need for this. And there have been some interesting editorials about past views of other groups. So that's something to think about. And in the coming weeks, we're going to explore that, because I think this Syrian refugee crisis, as well as continued discussion about terrorism, it's going to be a big part of the presidential elections. And I'm going to get into that drama that's tied to that. Don't worry. But one point that I do want to make, that, we've got Americans that are afraid of Syrian refugees. And then we've got, and now Europe. What they have done is, I know in some European countries that have taken in refugees, they do have them in encampments, if that's a proper word for that, but they are in camps and temporary camps. And I'll get more information on some of those processing in some of the other European countries like Germany and and other countries that agreed to take in Syrian refugees, which quite a few countries in Europe immediately did do that, which if you remember from my previous shows, I have said that I think that was the right thing to do. I still believe it is. And like I said at the top of this show, as long as the rest of the world were doing their part, yes, of course the U.S. would. And generally the U.S., I think we've identified some 10,000 people. And generally when we do that, our preference with our immigration laws, either people who are eligible to immigrate, they either have family here or identified qualified sponsors. And those qualified sponsors could be distant family that's proven, or employers, things of that nature. Those are the stipulations. And I do believe that some of the 10,000 fall into one or both, or some kind of category where there is someone who is already here in the States, as a citizen or legal citizen to be here, that they're able to vouch, in a formal and short way to say it, they're able to vouch for these refugees coming to the U.S., that it actually works out for them. So that's one thing. But in this whole debate, I just want to make a point of, there just does not seem to be any activity or support, I say for the public's sake, of where we see Arab nations being involved. And I always make this point because I'm always concerned about that, because we have a very diverse country in the United States, but a lot of times in the Middle East and countries in the Middle East, when you're dealing with people who have similar religions being Muslim, a lot of nations where this is the religion is heavily practiced, a lot of times we just don't see them embracing them, which I'm starting to think that it really defies the whole religious argument. And the religious argument that I'm talking about that's being defied is just because you practice a religion doesn't mean that people are the same. And we see that with the Palestinians. Again, no Arab nations are doing anything to help. Well, when I say help, be constructive towards solutions and peace. I'll just put it that way. And if this were on social media, I'd just say, I'm just going to leave that right here. But that's, I'm always concerned about that because, if you spend time with me, you'll always hear me say, so what are the Saudis doing? And I always ask that question is because, oil producing countries like that, they've got more than enough money. And how do we know money's not being siphoned off anywhere? And I get concerned when we hear things about these terrorists and these extremists that they don't speak up and they can't. And I'm sort of tired of them playing the card of we don't get involved with that when they get a lot of special favors, particularly from the 3 countries that are involved with dealing with ISIS. Now, I also will stand corrected if someone shares with me, well, they're not doing it up front, but maybe behind the scenes. But it just something about that, how you get that feeling that something's just not right. I just feel like something's not right. And, going back to 9/11, we knew that, the majority of the hijackers of the airplanes were Saudis. How'd that happen? How does that happen? And it's very hard for me to be convinced that they wouldn't know that. And, knowing about bin Laden, how nuts the guy was, and how do the Saudis not have to tiptoe around us? That's what I don't get. Their military is very well funded and they are trained. How is it if they are so good about keeping their jets and airliners from not being blown up? How come they can't help out or keep some things in check? And that just kind of, it kind of, that's a question that comes up for me a lot. And definitely listeners, if you got points on that, hit me up on Twitter. If you disagree with me on that, take me to school and help me understand, because I just don't. And it's common knowledge that in terms of how women are treated in Saudi Arabia, it's just horrible. So you can't convince me of that. But if you can convince me, if you've got something to take me to school on at how and what the Saudis are doing to prevent in the Western world some of the extremism, I would love to hear it, because I have a problem with that. I really do. But moving right along, I don't want to spend too much time on tragedy, but I want to move along to some big news that's going on here in Hollywood. I think there was Glamour did the Woman of the Year award, and Caitlyn Jenner was the recipient. And a lot of you have hit me up on social media as a result of asking me about kind of what, this whole, it seems like Caitlyn Jenner is the Woman of the Year kind of thing, and just my views. I don't have a problem with Caitlyn, And actually, when and I think I've mentioned this before, that once you know, the big Vanity Fair issue came out, I got a copy of the magazine and I read it. I read the stories, and you know, a lot of things I understood. I understood and identified with it. And, you know, anybody that knows me, I'm down with the LGBT community, and I'm definitely in support of the transgender community, and a lot of the issues that the transgender community has to deal with. And I'm quite supportive. Now, my views on Caitlyn Jenner are kind of mixed. It has nothing to do with being supportive about Caitlyn becoming transgendered. My issue, and I did see the show, you know, I did see Kate, and my whole issue is I kind of think Caitlyn still is figuring it out, and we're watching it, which it's a teaching moment, but at the same time, what I'm witnessing is not only how Kate's evolving into who she was meant to be. I'm seeing a side of Bruce that I just don't understand. People can be conservative, people can be progressive. I don't have a problem with that, but how Bruce was so conservative throws me off with this whole situation with Caitlyn. I mean, when I watched the show, you know, the whole episode about Caitlyn having to redo her membership, have to set up her membership at the country club that Bruce was a part of. And Caitlyn was going to write Bruce. And it's like, and I'm so glad Alexis was there to say, no, you're not Bruce, you're Caitlyn. And you know, and I'm one of these people who I'm very emotional, and I'm watching this show at home. And I actually said, good for you, Alexis, school her, and then it started thoughts of me that I've actually seen, and a lot of you have shared with me on social media, is the fact that Caitlyn's got rich people problems. Caitlyn doesn't have regular transgender people problems. And so although, you know, Glamour magazine selected Kate as Woman of the Year, which I'm fine with that. I mean, it's a magazine. So, I mean, if you think about it, the editors get together, they're trying to sell magazines, and they're going to put on the cover someone who's going to help them sell magazines. And this year, Caitlyn Jenner is in. A year from now, Caitlyn Jenner might not be. So I don't have a problem with that. Things that the problem that I just have is I think maybe Caitlyn and the people around Caitlyn may have wanted to have her wait to tell a lot of her business, because she's still evolving. And that's the part that I sort of kind of have a problem with. It not so much watching this person evolve, but the conflict. I just think that sometimes, I mean, I know with reality TV, there's openness, and you can definitely see the rawness in that show. But there was just some things that I think they should have just taken off camera that for those of us who are not a part of the inner circle or not a part of Caitlyn's family, we didn't need to know about that. Like, I didn't need to know about his I guess not being invited to I think his daughter's graduation or something like that, and to hear and I just called him, I'm sorry, and I think a lot of that just has to do with because I identify Caitlyn the way she behaved in the show, because she still would try to do Bruce things, but that whole thing, I didn't need to see that, and I understand how Chloe and Kim actually felt how they threw Kris Jenner under the bus, because he sort of did, and you could kind of tell. And he may not have meant it, but I could see it, and definitely based on what I read in the article. So that's sort of my beef. But and it's kind of just as Caitlyn evolves. But overall, I don't have a problem with the fact that Glamour magazine named her Woman of the Year. Don't really know what Caitlyn has done for the trans community, but I don't have a problem with it, because I think she looks really good. Because I'm going to tell you, when it finally came out, because I don't read tabloids, and for over the last year and a half, they kind of had a lot of these rag mags in the grocery store kind of was alluding to some of these changes, but I don't read that stuff. But then when it finally came out, and when I saw the Vanity Fair spread, I thought, dog, man, as a man, he was good looking. And now becoming who she was meant to be, my God, LA, we've got another skinny bitch in this town that's going to keep us from getting work when we go on auditions. And you can't be mad at that. And I'm not. I'm just kind of, I just kind of think that after this year, maybe Caitlyn Jenner kind of falls back a little bit, get into herself, evolve a little bit more, maybe, and I spend more time, with other transgendered individuals. And I really like that crew that they had on the show. I'm Kate. I actually wanted to know more about them versus Caitlyn. And I also get that Caitlyn was using herself and her past life fame to kind of tell this story and to show that. And I appreciate her doing that, because I'm a fan of Bruce Jenner, the old Bruce Jenner, and I'm good with the change. So I don't have a problem with it. And I do have a problem with people trying to think that they're going to try to pull those medals that were earned in 1976. Leave it alone, people. Just move on. But that's my thought on the whole Caitlyn Jenner thing. And then the biggest news story of the day here in Los Angeles is obviously about Charlie Sheen announcing his HIV positive status. And actually last night, late yesterday afternoon, it was kind of a soft announcement about that hit through the media wires about it. So, and it was sort of soft to know that the Today Show got the exclusive. And, it's kind of sad, but, the revelation of what has been going on with him for the past 4 years when he got this diagnosis, it kind of makes sense with some of the behavior that we saw. And when I say behavior, he just had, he has some issues. He's always had them. And I think what he did today was the right thing to do. From looking at big picture, the man has 4 kids. We have got to, I think he needed to do this for his children. And of course, everybody's talking about how some turned on him in his inner circle and how he was paying folks to keep quiet. So that's one thing. But I think the big picture here is that this man has 4 children. He needs to pave a way to show, there's so many images of him being, just being inappropriate. That's the easy way to say it. And for him, this moment, I think, is for him to own the consequences of that behavior for his kids. And it's sad that this happened to him, but him moving forward from this is something that I think is responsible. It's the responsible thing to do in thinking about his children. And, HIV, is one of those things where you do have to take care of yourself. And I mean, we have someone else in this town, I mean, big time person in this town who's HIV positive. And that's, and he announced it back in the early 90s. And that's Magic Johnson. He's moved on with his life. And they did confirm that, Charlie Sheen's wife, current, wife. Well, I don't even know if they're still married or not, but Brooke Mueller, she was with him during this 4-year span. So that she is not, that she tested negative, and so did the 2 children that she had with Charlie, a negative. So that's a good thing. I think we need to wish him well, and then we move on from it. And I think he did the right thing. And to those here in Hollywood, in the Hollywood circles that took money from him, you need to be ashamed of yourself for doing that and even trying to do something like that. But moving right along so that we can keep up with the show and keep up with the time here, the Republican and Democratic parties had some debates during the hiatus, and you guys definitely want to hear my talk about this. And as of today, as of a few hours ago, 3.5 hours ago, Bobby Jindal announced that he was dropping out. Oh, wow. He was one that I think a few shows ago I had predicted. I kind of given you a list of who would still be around and who wouldn't. And so far, I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. There are a couple of people who are still in the game that I don't get. But definitely Bobby Jindal was one that dude just needed to go. So he took the cue, seeing how he's not really doing very well there in Louisiana. Basically that state is a hot mess, and he figured he instead of trying to run for president and be all around the country, he might need to go ahead and stay in Baton Rouge and kind of maybe do the job he already knows that he has. And I have to give him props for that. I think that was a good choice to get out of the race. Now, for those that are still in the race, I have to tell you, I never would have thought this would be happening, that Ben Carson would be considered a front runner, that Ben Carson would be considered a viable candidate. Now, Donald Trump, he's been pretty consistent. I just called these two, Carson and Trump, they have, they're crazy squared. That's about all I can say with it. And I can't see individuals in this country who are registered Republican voters falling behind these two. I don't see it. Ben Carson, in just the last couple of weeks, he's been caught up in some creative storytelling about his background, everything from being offered a scholarship to West Point, and that was a big rut-row for him because what some of you may not know, to go to West Point, there's no cost to that. One of the reasons why you have to be nominated by a member of Congress, and generally it's I don't know if it's changed or not, but I do know that a preference is given by members of the U.S. Senate to do your recommendations, but he got caught up with that, and then he danced around that with some semantics of words, and then and then there's the issue about, I think, the person who he hit with a hammer or something. And I'm just thinking, this dude had some problems, and the fact that he had emotional issues or something, or something. Basically, dude's not wired right. And I just find it amazing how he was a brilliant surgeon. There's definitely, and a friend of mine was telling me that that's how it is with idiot savant syndrome, which I don't think that his IQ is that. But, they were just trying to explain something to me that I just pointed out that I just didn't understand. So, Carson and Trump, they're kind of the top two front runners. And then you've got Marco Rubio coming in at third. And he was actually predicted to be, the winner of the last debate last week. And Marco Rubio, I'm going to put him out as the next person to drop out. And the reason why I'm going to put him out to drop out, and I'm even going to suggest that he drop out. Marco Rubio has an ongoing financial fiasco situation from his days in the Florida House, when he was in the Florida legislature. There were issues with him using the Republican Party American Express card to pay for things that were not politically related, like having his driveway paved. And how he explains it is, and again, it's semantics. He says, well, this was a card issued to me using my own personal credit. And I don't buy that, because if Mr. Rubio had worked a real job like the rest of us who have worked jobs where you do get company cards, yours truly here, I've worked for a lot of companies that have American Express cards issued, corporate cards issued, and yes, you do use your own personal credit, but you do not charge anything on your American Express card, on the corporate card, if it's not business related to the corporation, which in this case was the Republican Party. Now, what's interesting with this case with Marco Rubio is a official within the Republican Party did the same thing that Rubio did. That official, Republicans had him sent to jail, but Marco Rubio hasn't. So, and then there's been claims that they paid the bills, and he just continues to dance around that. And then also he had a property to go in foreclosure, and that's something that's been following him since his days in the Florida House. But on top of that, Marco Rubio has missed more than 50% of the votes in the U.S. Senate. And he has replied that, those votes didn't mean anything. So, I think between that and then Marco Rubio's history in the state of Florida with creating sweetheart deals for a lot of companies, and his close ties to the prison industrial complex, and his association with the good old Stand Your Ground law that basically killed Trayvon Martin in the state of Florida. He's got a lot of baggage, and I think the best thing that he can do is go back to Miami, and I'll tell you how Marco Rubio can reinvent himself. Go back to Miami, either run for Dade County mayor or for City of Miami mayor, wherever. And I believe he lives in West Dade, which would put him in the county for sure. I don't think he lives in the city limits, but run for Dade County mayor, make a real accomplishment in that role, seeing how that county mayor role is nonpartisan, and rebuild your organization. Because, homie, it's just not working out for you. And to say, and I know I make my Cuban friends upset when I say this, but it's true. Marco Rubio will not play very well in certain parts of this country because he will be considered, he's not, people will not view him as American. I just got to go there. It is just the way some people are. And the party that he is associated with, that is how a lot of people think, and particularly in parts of the Midwest. Marco Rubio just needs to go back to Florida, South Florida, go back to Miami, and rebuild himself and reinvent himself. That Senate seat that he has, is basically a de facto win that he had because the good old boys in Florida, they had it out for Charlie Crist, who was running as an independent. And then you had Kendrick Meek, who was running as the Democrat. So you had a major split. So the dark horse, which was Marco Rubio, he just rolled right on in. And I assure you, if had the good old boys had somebody they wanted in place, Marco Rubio would not be in the U.S. Senate. And I think that'll help him because he's also said some crazy things like, he some things about the votes, either not being important, and then things that he's not interested in doing, and things like that. It's not coming across very well. And I think that I do think in some cases he has been moderate. He's been a little too silent on things that's happening with other areas of the Latino diaspora. And when I say other areas, I am talking about immigration and how there always seems to be a focus on the Mexican community when Mexicans are not the only individuals tied to, immigration law in this country. And that's something that I think he's unfair. He's been too quiet about. The next person who I think should also join, be on my list for leaving the race is Mike Huckabee. It's just like, dude, it's just never going to happen. And that's about all I will say about that. And then, Jeb Bush, who it's so obvious that he's the establishment candidate. He has been attacking folks. So, it's going to be interesting in the next couple of weeks. I also think Jeb Rand will eventually drop out the race. And John Kasich, who I actually think is the most qualified Republican in the race, I think he'll be around, but I think by spring he'll be done. I do think out of everybody, and I guess I'll say Carly Fiorina, she'll probably hang around. She's not going to raise very much money. I just don't see her doing that. But I think once we start in January in the primary start, we're going to see people getting real and they realize how far they don't work out. And for the Democrats, Jim Webb and Lincoln Chafee are out, which that was kind of a no-brainer for them. So the Democrats are down to 3, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Martin O'Malley. I like to say they had a good debate, but I didn't watch it. A lot of people didn't watch it. It was on Saturday, and it's college football, and nobody has time for that. But with that, in closing, I'm going to leave it there, and we're going to pick up this show regularly again right after the Thanksgiving. So the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving, we're going to go at it again. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm so happy to be a part of the We Play Radio family. And the We Play Radio family is a collective of some wonderful shows. The Very Manic Jimmy Cab show with Jimmy Cab. You have to check him out. That show is off the chain. Jimmy himself is just fabulous. And then Nestorius Public Radio with Nestor Rodriguez and Sal Rodriguez. You want to talk about fun, and you just want to talk about off the hook. That's a show for you. And then one show that I think is just so clever. He's so clever. Vic Cohen's It's a Fair Question. Everything's a good question to ask. And the way he does it, you will find him quite entertaining. And then there's here in the collective, a good show called The Dark Mark Show. And Dark Mark, he will take you where you have never been before. And LA Taco Radio with Johnny Scott Gramercy. Wonderful. My bro there, he really puts it down, and you'll enjoy listening to him. And if for all of our what I call my power listeners, you definitely have to check out Psych One-on-One with Julianne Good. She's a great psychologist, and you not only learn things that can help yourself, help you understand yourself. She's just a great presenter. So I'm happy to be a part of the We Play Radio family with this lineup of wonderful shows. And again, I hope you catch me here, same time, and certainly always catch me on social media. Thanks so much for listening.